There is a rule in the queen's wardrobe older than any queen I ever served. No garment enters this room and no garment leaves it without being written down. Every gown, every stomacher, every length of ribbon, every button of jet counted in, counted out, weighed if it must be, and set against a ledger in my own hand. People laugh at that. They think a wardrobe is a place of vanity, a warm room full of silk and idle talk where women pass an hour. They are wrong. A wardrobe of the crown is a treasury that happens to be soft, and a treasury is only as honest as the person who keeps its book. My name is Adeline Marsh, and for 31 years I was keeper of the wardrobe to the royal house of Harrogate in the kingdom of Eldermore. I dressed a good queen, and then I dressed a bad one, and I will tell you now at the very start so that you know where I stand. I did not uncover the thing that broke that winter open. I only kept the book that made the uncovering possible, and I stood in the room when it happened, and I saw the face of the man who would not let the count come out wrong. But the finding was his. It has always seemed important to me that the credit fall where it is owed, because so much of what went rotten in that house went rotten for exactly the opposite reason. People took what was not theirs, and then wrote another name against it. The man was a guardsman named Aldous Finch, and I want to be honest about him too, because I misjudged him at first the way everyone did. When they first sent him up to my wardrobe, I was insulted. I had asked the Lord Chamberlain for a second seamstress and a new run of shelving. I received instead a soldier, a tall, plain, close-shaven man of perhaps 40, in the dark undress coat the household guard wear when they are off the forecourt and out of their scarlet, with a way of filling a doorway as though the doorway had been made to be stood in, and he was simply the last piece of it. I told him that first morning that I had no use for a rifle in a room full of needles. He said, without any heat at all, that he had not brought a rifle, and that if the keeper would show him where the inventory was kept and how it was reconciled, he would try to stay out of the way. Then he stood by the door and said nothing for 4 hours, and I forgot he was there, which, I understood much later, was a thing he did on purpose, and did better than any man I have known. I should explain why a guard had been set upon the wardrobe at all, because it was not the custom, and the reason is the whole shape of the trouble. For 30 years I had kept the wardrobe under the old order, the late Queen Isolde's order, God keep her. Queen Isolde was the king's first wife, and she died when her children were still small, and whatever else you have heard of that house, I will tell you plainly that she was a woman who understood a book. She knew that a wardrobe of the crown is not one woman's closet but a store of things, some of which belong to the crown itself, and not to the person wearing them. The state jewels sewn into a coronation mantle, the row of great pearls that passes from queen to queen, the gowns worked so heavily in gold thread that they are inventoried as bullion, because that is what they are. She made the rule that every such thing be double-entered, once by weight, once by description, and reconciled twice a year against the master roll, and she made me swear to it, and for as long as she lived I kept it, and not one coin's weight of the crown's gold ever went astray on my watch. Then Queen Isolde died, and in his time King Alaric married again, and the second queen was Morwenna. I will try to be fair to her. It is hard after what I saw, but I will try, because fairness is the only revenge a bookkeeper is permitted, and I have grown fond of it in my old age. Queen Consort Morwenna was a handsome woman, quick and warm in company, generous to those who pleased her, and she had a gift I have never possessed. She could make a whole room believe that whatever she wished for was the room's own idea. She came into the wardrobe like weather. Within a single season, the store that Queen Isolde had built like a strongbox had become, in feeling if not yet in fact, Morwenna's private closet, and the debauchery the late queen had sworn me to began, very gently, to be treated as an old woman's fussing that a modern court had outgrown. It began with small things, the way these things always do. A brooch borrowed and not signed out, returned 3 days later with a light laugh, and a hand laid on my arm, Adeline, you dear worrier, as if I would run off with a bit of paste. A length of gold thread velvet cut for a new gown without the weight being logged first, so that afterward I could never prove how much bullion had gone into the garment and how much might have gone elsewhere. A key to the strong press, the locked cabinet where the sewn-in crown pieces are kept, that had hung on my belt and my belt alone for 30 years, and that now, at the Queen Consort's own request to the Chamberlain, hung on a second ring in her dressing woman's keeping, for convenience, so that a gown might be finished at night after the keeper had gone to her bed. I fought each of these the way a keeper fights, which is to say quietly and on paper. I wrote memoranda. I noted discrepancies in the margin in a small hand. I asked once that the reconciliation be brought forward, and was told by the Chamberlain, a tired man who wanted only peace in his last years of office, that the Queen Consort found the reconciliations distressing to her nerves, and that surely, after so many years, the keeper's book could be trusted without so much ceremony. I understood then that the wall the late Queen had built around her store was being taken down one stone at a time, and that no one would stop it, because every stone was so small that to defend it made me look exactly like the fussing old woman they had decided I was. And then, in the autumn of the winter I am about to tell you of, the king did a thing that seemed at the time a mild inconvenience, and turned out to be the hinge on which everything swung. He ordered a guard set upon the wardrobe. He did not do it for my sake, he did it for a duller reason. A piece of crown property, a sapphire clasp that belonged to the state and to no queen, had been reported by the master of the jewel house as unaccounted for during a loan to a foreign embassy, and had then, embarrassingly, turned up in the lining of a traveling case. And the king, who for all his faults had a horror of the crown's things going astray in ways that shamed him before other crowns, decreed that thenceforth any store holding crown property must have a guard of the household present at every opening and closing, to witness and to sign. It was a rule about jewels. It happened, because gowns hold jewels, to be a rule about my wardrobe. And so they sent me Aldous Finch. Now understand what that meant, though no one at the time did, least of all the Queen Consort, who greeted the news with a wave of her hand as one more piece of the king's tiresome carefulness. It meant that every time the strong press was opened, every time a gown with crown pieces sewn into it went in or came out, every time the dressing woman used her convenient second key in the night, a guardsman of the king's own household had to be present, and had to sign the book, and could not be waved away with a laugh and a hand on the arm. It meant that the late Queen's dying debauchery suddenly had a witness who could not be charmed and could not be dismissed, because he answered neither to the Queen Consort nor to the Chamberlain, but only to the captain of the guard, and above him to the king. The Queen Consort did not see the danger. She had spent 3 years learning to manage the people of the wardrobe, and she assumed she would manage this one too. She was used to men who wished to please her. She had never in her life had to deal with a man who simply did not want anything she could give. Finch learned the book faster than I had expected. I gave him the master role on his second day, half hoping to bore him back down to the forecourt, and instead he read it the way a soldier reads ground, looking for the places where a thing could go wrong. He asked me only 2 questions that first week. The first was which entries were made by weight and which by description, and when I told him, he nodded as though I had confirmed something he already suspected. The second was who else held a key to the strong press, and when I told him about the second ring in the dressing woman's keeping, he was quiet a moment, then asked, very mildly, whether the book recorded who opened the press each time, or only that it had been opened. I said it recorded only that it had been opened. The late Queen's rule had never imagined a second key. He said, then from today it records who, and he ruled a fresh column in the book with a straightedge in his own pen, headed it opened by, witnessed by asterisk, and from that day forward no one opened that cabinet without 2 names going down beside the deed. The dressing woman complained. The Queen Consort, I am told, only laughed and said to let the poor man have his columns. She still did not see it. I want to tell you about the child now, because she is the heart of it, and I would not have you think this a story about ledgers. It is a story about a little girl and the thing that was taken from her, and the ledgers are only the shape the theft left in the world when it passed through. The Princess Elara was the youngest of the late Queen Isolde's children, and she had been born frail. I had dressed her since she could stand. The smallest gowns in my store were hers, kept back from her sisters, taken in and let out as she grew in her uneven way, and I loved her the way a keeper is not supposed to love anything but the book. She was a grave, watchful child who noticed everything and said little, which the court took for shyness, and I took for what it was, which is that a frail child learns early to watch the room for danger. She had spent that autumn 3 weeks in the royal infirmary with a fever of the lungs that frightened us all, and she had come home from it thin and quiet and clinging, and around her wrist when she came home, there was a small band of woven material such as the physicians put upon their patients so that no draught goes to the wrong bed. A hospital bracelet, they call it, with her name upon it and the date of her admission, and a mark that meant which medicines were hers. You would think such a thing would be cut off and burned the day she came home. It was not, and the reason is the whole of why it mattered later. The princess would not let it be cut off. It had been on her wrist through the worst nights of her fever, the nights the physicians would not promise us she would see the morning, and in the frightened logic of a small girl who has been very ill, it had become the thing that kept her safe. She wore it under her sleeve like a talisman. Her nurses indulged it, and her stepmother, for Queen Isolde was in the ground, and Morwenna was the only mother the court would now name. Her stepmother did not indulge it at all. I heard the first of it from the nurses. The Queen Consort thought the bracelet common, unsightly, a scrap of infirmary rubbish clinging to a princess's wrist and beneath the dignity of the house. She said as much at table, more than once, that a daughter of Harrogate ought not go about got up like a charity patient. She ordered it removed. The princess wept and would not have it removed. And there the matter sat, a small domestic war between a grieving stepmother who wished the house to look well and a frail child who wished to keep the one thing that had been with her in the dark. I would have thought no more of it, God forgive me, than I thought of any of the small unhappinesses that pass through a great house in a season, if the bracelet had not, one gray morning in early winter, simply vanished. The princess woke and it was gone from her wrist. She had worn it to sleep as always. She woke and it was not there. She was inconsolable in the quiet, ruinous way of a child who has learned not to make a noise about her grief. The nurses turned the nursery over and found nothing, and the story that came down to us below stairs was that the little band of infirmary cloth had worked loose in the night, been swept up with the morning rubbish, and burned, and that the princess must be gently taught that it was only a thing, and things are lost. I did not believe it. I will tell you honestly why. It was not a woman's intuition, and it was not love. It was the book. Because on the very morning the princess found her bracelet gone, my wardrobe book showed a thing it should not have shown. The strong press had been opened in the night by the dressing woman's convenient second key, and there was a name in Aldous Finch's new column beside it, because he had been present as the rule now required, and beside that name in his own square hand was a note I did not understand until much later. It read simply, "Green state gown returned from the cleaners, hem reworked, one seam not the wardrobe's work, flag for inventory." Let me set that morning down carefully, because it is where the plain business of a wardrobe and the private grief of a child first crossed, though neither Finch nor I yet knew it. The green state gown was one of the Queen Consort's grandest, a heavy court gown of deep bottle green silk, with a train worked in gold thread and a stomacher into which, when it was worn for the highest occasions, a set of the crown's emeralds was stitched, then unstitched and returned to the strong press after. It was, in the language of my book, a asterisk-charged garment, a gown against which crown property was, at times, entered, and so, Under the king's new rule, it could not be handled without a guard present to witness. It had gone out to the cleaners a fortnight before, as such gowns do, for the careful handwork that a court silk needs, and it had come back in the night, and the dressing woman had used her second key to hang it in the strong press against the coming winter feast, and Finch had been fetched from his post to witness the return, because that is what the rule required. That much was ordinary. What was not ordinary was the note, one seam not the wardrobe's work. I asked him about it the next morning, over the reconciliation of the daily book, which we now did together at the long cutting table with the lamps lit against the winter dark. I asked him what he had meant. The hem of the train, he said. It was reworked at the cleaners. That is on the docket is in order. But when I witnessed it into the press, I looked at the work, as I look at everything I sign, and one length of the hem, perhaps a hand's breadth, was not sewn the way your women sew. Your women use a slip stitch, close and even, so fine you have to hold it to the lamp to count it. This length was a running stitch, larger, quicker, doubled back at the end. A different hand, a hand in a hurry. I confess I was faintly amused. Sergeant, I said, gowns go to the cleaners. The cleaners have their own women. If a seam gave on the journey, one of their girls will have caught it up before it came home. That is not a mystery. That is a fortnight in the life of a silk. Perhaps, he said, he did not argue. He never argued. He only declined, quietly, to be talked out of a thing he had seen with his own eyes. But the docket says the reworking was to the left fall of the train, and the hurried seam is on the right . And the docket names the girl who did the left fall and lists her work, and the right hem is not on the list. So a seam on that gown was opened and closed by a hand that is not in your book and not in the cleaner's book. It may be nothing. A girl mending a thing she tore and not troubling to write it down. But your late queen's rule is that a charged garment is reconciled by weight as well as by description. So I would like, when you have an idle hour, to weigh the gown. Weigh it, I repeated. The emeralds are out of it, he said. They are in the press, I have seen them. So the gown, empty of its crown pieces, has a known weight. It is in your master roll. You weighed it yourself the day it was made. I have read the entry. If the gown weighs what your roll says it weighs, then the hurried seam holds nothing, and I have wasted an hour of your time, and I will beg your pardon. But if it weighs more than the roll says, if there is a thing sewn into that hem that is not meant to be there, then I would rather we found it, keeper, on a quiet morning with the two of us and the book, than have it found some other way, at some other hour, by some other person, with our two names in the column and no explanation to give. I did not weigh the gown that day. I want to be honest about my own failures in this, because they are part of the story. I did not weigh it because I was busy, and because I did not believe him, and because this is the truth of it, and it shames me, because I was afraid of what it would mean to make a formal weighing of the Queen Consort's grandest gown on nothing more than a guardsman's notion about a stitch. A weighing goes in the book. The book is read. If I weighed that gown and found nothing, I would have made an enemy of the most dangerous woman in the house over a running stitch, and I had spent 3 years learning, one small defeat at a time, exactly how much that could cost me. So I told him I would weigh it after the feast, when the press was quiet, and I turned the page of the daily book, and I let it lie. I have had long to regret that, and I have made my peace with it, but I set it down plainly so that you understand. The honest people in this story were slow, and the reason they were slow was fear, and the only person in that wardrobe who moved at the true speed of a thing seen was the guardsman that everyone, including me, had mistaken for furniture. It was 3 days after that the princess's bracelet vanished from her wrist. I did not connect the two. Why would I? A little girl loses a scrap of infirmary cloth in the nursery, 3 floors above. A guardsman finds a hurried stitch in a court gown, in a locked room in the wardrobe wing. There is no line a sensible mind would draw between them. But Aldous Finch, it turned out, was not in the business of drawing lines a sensible mind would draw. He was in the business of noticing things, and of holding them all in his head at once until they arranged themselves. He came to me the morning after the bracelet was lost. The nursery was in a quiet uproar, the story of the swept-up cloth going round the below stairs, and he asked me a question I thought, at the time, was merely the idle curiosity of a man being kind about a child's grief. "This band the little princess wore," he said, "the infirmary band, what was it made of?" I told him. "A woven strip," I said, "of the tough wax tape the physicians use, with a metal fastening, a small flat clasp, like a buckle without a tongue, that snaps shut and cannot be opened again without cutting. That is the point of it, so that it cannot fall off a sick child in the night. It has a little window of stiffened paper under a skin of clear waxed cloth, and on the paper is written the patient's name and the date and the physician's mark." Finch was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So it has metal in it, a clasp, small but metal, and a stiffened window that would not soften even in the wash." He was not looking at me. He was looking at the middle distance, the way he did when the things in his head were arranging themselves. "Keeper," he said, "when you have that idle hour, bring it forward. Let us weigh the green gown today." "Sergeant," I said, and I heard the sharpness in my own voice and did not much like it, "you cannot mean that a child's lost bracelet and a stitch in the Queen Consort's gown are the same matter. You cannot mean to walk into the strong press and tell me that Her Majesty has sewn a scrap of infirmary tape into the hem of her court train. Do you hear yourself? Do you know what it would cost either of us to say such a thing aloud and be wrong?" "I have said nothing aloud," he answered, in that level, unhurried way that I was coming to find both maddening and, against my will, steadying. "I have asked to weigh a charged garment against your own master roll, which is your late Queen's rule and the King's rule and no invention of mine. If it weighs what it should, we close the book and never speak of it, and no one is accused of anything, because a weighing is not an accusation. It is only a number. But I will tell you what I think, Keeper, since you have asked me to hear myself. I think a thing was hidden. I think it was hidden in a hurry, in a place a careful person believed no one would ever look, because who weighs a gown? Who counts the ounces of a silk? And I think it was hidden by someone who could not simply destroy it, who needed it gone from where it was, and out of a child's keeping, but who could not bring themselves, or did not dare, to burn it. And a gown going quietly out to the cleaners and coming quietly back is a very good way to move a small thing out of a house and into a locked room where a princess will never go looking, and where the only person who might notice a hurried stitch is a keeper too busy and too frightened to weigh it. I sat down. I remember that I sat down on the tall stool at the cutting table, and I put my hand flat on the daily book, on his square-handed note about the seam that was not the wardrobe's work, and I felt the whole shape of the last 3 years rearrange itself in my chest. Every borrowed brooch not signed out, every unlogged length of velvet, every small stone quietly pried from the late Queen's wall. And I understood, sitting there, that I had been looking at all of it as a bookkeeper looks at a book, tidying the margins, and that a man who was not a bookkeeper had come into my room and looked at the same things and seen, not untidy margins, but a pattern, the patient, careful pattern of a hand that took what it wanted and wrote another name against it. "Bring me the master roll," I said. My voice did not sound like mine. "And fetch the scale, the proper scale, the assay scale, not the tailor's balance. If we are to weigh Her Majesty's gown, Sergeant, we will weigh it to the grain, and we will do it correctly, and we will do it now, before I lose my nerve." Something moved in his plain face then, not a smile. He was not a man who smiled at such a moment, but a kind of settling, the look of a man who has been waiting a long time for another person to catch up to a thing he has known for days. "Yes, Keeper," he said, and he went to fetch the scale. The opening of the strong press was itself a ceremony, and I set it down here in full, because the whole of what came after rested on our having done it correctly. A charged garment cannot be handled in secret. That is the late Queen's rule, and it is a wise one, because a thing done in secret can always be called a lie afterward, and the only defense against being called a liar is to do everything in the light with a witness who signs. So we did not creep. We did it in the open, at midday, with the wardrobe's outer door standing unbolted and the daily book laid open on the cutting table, and I sent for a second seamstress, my steadiest woman, Damaris, to stand and see, and Finch fetched the scale and stood ready to witness and to sign, and I unlocked the strong press with my own key while he entered the hour and the reason in his column. Press opened to weigh green state gown against master roll, at keeper's order. We were 3 honest people and a book, and we were about to do a lawful thing, and I held on to that, because my hands had begun to shake. The green gown hung in its muslin sleeve at the end of the press, the emeralds out of it and safe in their own drawer, and we lifted it down between us and carried it to the table and laid it out flat, the long gold-worked train unrolled to its full length. And there, when Finch turned the hem of the right fall to the lamp, was the thing he had seen, a hand's breadth of running stitch, larger and quicker than my women's slip stitch, doubled back at the end. To my trained eye, now that I was made to look, it was as plain as a signature in the wrong hand at the foot of a letter. Someone not of the wardrobe had opened that hem and closed it again. We weighed the gown. I want to describe this properly, because it is the crux of the whole matter and I will not have it thought a guess. The assay scale is a true scale, the same the jewel house uses, that will show you the difference of a single grain. The master roll gave the gown's weight, taken by my own hand the day it was finished, empty of its crown pieces, in a figure I had written and initialed years before and could not now have altered if I had wished to. We hung the gown on the scale, empty, the emeralds out, and we read the number, and Finch read it aloud, and Damaris read it, so that 3 of us had seen it, and I entered it in the book beneath the master figure. The gown weighed more than the roll said, not much, a matter of a few drams, but a gown does not gain weight sitting in a press. Silk does not thicken with the years. A few drams is nothing to the eye and everything to the scale, and there was no honest reason on this earth for that gown to weigh a hair more than the day it was made, unless something had been put into it that was not on the roll. There, said Finch very quietly, the scale does not care whose gown it is, it only tells the truth. Now, keeper, with your leave and with Damaris to witness, and in the open on the book I will open that seam. I gave my leave. He took my smallest, sharpest unpicking knife and he laid the hem across his knee, and he opened the running stitch a stitch at a time, slowly, letting each go with a little sound, and he did not tear the silk, and he did not hurry, and I have never watched anything so hard in my life. And when the last of the doubled thread came free, he folded back the hem, and inside, between the silk and the stiffening, where no honest thing is ever sewn, there was a small flat shape wrapped in a scrap of plain linen. He did not touch it with his fingers. He tipped it out onto the linen, onto the open book, so that it fell into the light without a hand having closed on it, and there it lay for all 3 of us to see. It was the princess's hospital bracelet. There was no mistaking it. The tough wax tape, the little metal clasp that snaps and cannot be reopened, the window of stiffened paper under its skin of clear cloth, and on the paper, in a physician's plain hand, the Princess Elara's name, and the date of her admission to the infirmary, and the mark that meant which drafts were hers. It had not been swept up with the rubbish. It had not worked loose in the night and been burned. It had been cut from a sleeping child's wrist, for the clasp was cut, I saw at once, cut clean with a blade, not broken, and carried down through the sleeping house, and sewn into the hem of a court gown, and sent out to the cleaners and quietly back, to lie in a locked room where the child would never go and the only person who might weigh a gown was too frightened to. Damaris made a small sound and put her hand to her mouth. I did not make any sound at all. I stood and looked at the little band of cloth lying on the open page of my own book, with the princess's name looking up at me, and I felt something in me that I had not felt in 31 years of keeping, not the bookkeeper's small, tidy anger at a discrepancy, but a great cold grief because I understood, standing there, exactly what I was looking at. I was looking at cruelty. Not theft, the bracelet was worth nothing. It was a scrap of tape and a paper, but cruelty, deliberate and patient. Someone had wanted a frightened, frail child parted from the one comfort she had carried out of the dark, and had not merely taken it, but taken it in a way that let the child believe it had been carelessly lost and burned, so that there would be nothing to mourn and no one to blame. Someone had wanted the little princess to learn that things are lost, and to stop asking. And that someone had needed the bracelet gone but had not destroyed it, and I have thought long about why, and I believe Finch was right, and I will tell you his reasoning when he gave it, because it turned out to matter more than any of us guessed. "Do not touch it further," Finch said. His voice had gone very steady and very careful, the voice of a man walking on ice with something precious in his arms. "Keeper, leave it where it lies. Damaris, you have seen it fall from the seam, untouched by any hand." "I have," Damaris whispered. "Say it again, please, and clearly, for I will ask you to say it before graver people than me. From where did it fall?" "From the hem of the green gown," said Damaris, steadier now, catching his purpose. "The right fall of the train, sewn inside in a running stitch wrapped in linen. It fell from the seam onto the book. No one touched it." "Good," said Finch. "Keeper, will you enter it? Every word. The weighing, the excess, the opening of the seam, what fell out, the three of us who saw. And I will sign, and Damaris will sign, and you will sign, and we will lock the book and the bracelet both in the press together, and I will keep the key of the book on my own person until it can be laid before the king. Not before the chamberlain, not before Her Majesty, before the king or before the king's sister, who I am told is a woman who cannot be turned and no one below them. Do you understand me, Keeper? From this hour, the only safe direction for this thing to travel is up." I understood him. I sat down at the cutting table and I took up my pen and I entered it, all of it, in the plainest words I owned, the way the late queen had taught me, not what I felt, not what I feared, only what I had seen and weighed and counted. The gown's roll weight, the scale weight, the excess. The seam knot of the wardrobe's work, the opening, the small linen wrap, the bracelet and the princess's name upon it and the clean-cut clasp, and the three of us who had watched it fall. And when I had finished, and the three of us had signed, and Finch had turned the key of the book and slipped it onto the chain beneath his collar with the brass token of his office, I asked him the question that had been sitting cold in my chest since the seam came open. "Why did she keep it?" I said. If someone went to all this trouble to make the child believe it was burned, why not simply burn it? Why sew it away where it might be found instead of putting it in the fire where it never could be?" Finch was a long time answering. He stood by the strong press with his hand on the shut door of it, and I watched him turn the question over, and when he spoke it was slowly, feeling his way. "Two reasons, I think," he said, "and the first is the smaller. A thing burned in a great house leaves an ash and a witness. There are always eyes. A fire in a private grate at an odd hour, a maid who smells scorched cloth, a footman who wonders. To burn a thing safely you must burn it where you will not be seen doing it, and in a palace there is nowhere a person of high rank is truly unseen. But a gown going out to the cleaners is unremarkable. A seam is private. So the seam was safer than the fire for the getting rid of. And the second reason." He looked at me, and there was something in his pale, steady eyes that I did not like, a shadow of a thing he had reasoned all the way to and did not enjoy. "The second reason," he said, "is that a person does not hide a thing they merely want gone. A thing you merely want gone you destroy. You hide a thing you may want asterisk back. And that, Keeper, is what troubles me most in all of this, and it is why I will not rest at the finding of one bracelet. A cruelty against a child is a grief, but keeping the proof of it, sewing it away alive, in a place you can go to again, that is not cruelty only. That is a person building something. A person who takes a child's talisman and keeps it in reserve is a person who means to use it, and I would give a great deal to know what for. I did not understand him then. I understood him 3 days later, when the strong press was opened at an hour it should not have been, by a key that should not have turned, and the whole quiet business of a weighed gown became a race. But I am ahead of myself, and I have promised to tell this in its order. Let me tell you, then, how the news of the finding did not go up the way Finch intended, and how, for a few very bad days, it looked as though the honest people would lose after all. Finch's plan was simple and correct, and it should have worked, and the reason it did not work is a lesson I have never forgotten. In a house where power has been let to rot for years, the honest channels are already blocked, and a man who tries to send the truth up the proper pipes finds them full. The proper channel was this. A discovery of Crown Store irregularity is reported by the guard on witness to his captain, who lays it before the king's household council. That is the pipe. Finch went to his captain that same evening, a decent man named Osric. I knew him a little gray and careful, and laid the matter before him, and asked that it go up to the king, and up past the chamberlain, whom he did not trust. And Captain Osric listened, and went pale, and did the thing that decent frightened men do. He said he must be certain. He said a charge of this gravity against the Queen Consort could not go to the king on the word of one guardsman and one weighing, that he must first satisfy himself, that he would look into it quietly * before he troubled the king. And quietly * in a rotted house means through the very people who ought not to hear. Osric, meaning only to be careful, mentioned the matter, not the whole of it, only enough, to the one official whose office it seemed to touch, the Lord Chamberlain. And the Lord Chamberlain, that tired man who wanted only peace, and who had spent 3 years being managed by the Queen Consort the way we had all been managed, went, within the hour, and told her. I know he told her because of what happened next, and the timing of it, and because Finch, who missed very little, watched it happen and understood it and told me after. It was the second night after the finding. The bracelet and the book were locked in the strong press, and the key of the book was on the chain at Finch's throat, and Finch himself, who could not lawfully sleep in the wardrobe, had done the next best thing. He had arranged with Captain Osric, before he understood how the land lay, that a guard would stand the wardrobe wing through the night hours, since it now held evidence in a crown matter. That was the correct precaution. But Osric had told the chamberlain, and the chamberlain had told the Queen Consort, and so the Queen Consort knew 2 things that Finch did not know she knew. She knew that the bracelet had been found, and she knew that it was locked in the press with the book, and she knew, because she had a second key, that the press could be opened. What she did not know was that Finch had stopped trusting the arrangement the very hour Osric hesitated. When a careful man tells you he will look into a thing quietly, Finch said to me, and goes pale doing it, you have learned 2 things. You have learned that he is honest, and you have learned that he is afraid, and an honest, frightened man is a leak. I did not blame Osric, but I did not sleep in my quarters that night either. He had gone, instead, and taken up a post of his own choosing, not in the wardrobe wing where the arranged guard stood, at the door everyone knew, but in the little dark stair-turn beyond the strong press itself, the servants' way that the great ones forget exists, from which a man can see the door of the press without being seen. He had stood there in the cold from midnight, on nobody's order but his own, because a thing hidden by a hand that meant to use it again is a thing that hand will come back for. She came at the low hour, the hour after 2, when a house sleeps hardest. Not the Queen Consort herself. She was far too clever for that, but her dressing woman, the one who held the convenient second key, moving quietly along the wardrobe wing with a shaded candle, passed the arranged guard at the outer door with a whispered word, for the dressing woman had every right to be in the wardrobe at any hour. That was the whole point of the second key, and to the strong press, and the key went into the lock and turned. Finch let her open it. He told me that after, and I asked him how he could bear to, and he said a thing I have turned over ever since. Because a lock turned in the dark proves nothing, keeper. A dressing woman may say she came to fetch a shawl, but a hand reaching for the one drawer that holds the bracelet and the book in the dark at the low hour, 2 nights after the finding, that is not a shawl. I needed her to reach for it. I needed to see the hand actually close on the thing, in front of a witness, or it would be my word again, and my word had already failed once up the pipe. So I waited, and I let her open the press, and I let her set down the candle and reach into the very drawer, and only then did I come out of the dark with a light of my own and Damaris behind me. For I had woken Damaris and set her at the stair-turn's foot an hour before, so that there would be 2 of us, so that it would never again be one guardsman's word. I would have given a great deal to have seen the dressing woman's face when the light came up. Finch did not gloat over it. That was not in him. He simply told her quietly to take her hand out of the drawer and step back, and he entered the hour and the deed in a small book he carried on his own person. The time, the turned key, the shaded candle, the hand in the drawer that held the evidence, Damaris to witness. And then he did a thing that I think was the cleverest of the whole affair, cleverer than any of us understood at the time. He did not seize the dressing woman, he did not raise the house, he let her go. He let her take her candle and go back the way she had come, shaken and silent, to carry to whoever had sent her the news that the press had been guarded, that the reaching hand had been seen, that there were 2 witnesses now and a second book. Because, and he explained this to me the next morning, over the cold reconciliation, in that level unhurried voice, the Queen Consort does not yet know how much I have. She sent to test whether the thing was truly found and truly locked away, and to take it back if it could be taken quietly. Now she knows it is guarded and that a hand was caught reaching for it. So she will stop reaching. She will change her method. A person like that, when the quiet way fails, turns to the loud way, she will not try to steal the proof any longer. She will try to discredit it. And that, keeper, is a slower attack, and a slower attack gives me time. Every hour she spends preparing to call us liars is an hour in which I can get the truth in front of the one person she cannot call a liar to. He paused. I only pray Captain Osric finds his courage before she finds her story. It is a race now, but at least I know I am in a race, which is more than I knew 2 days ago. The next morning proved him right about her method, and it was worse than even he had guessed. The Queen Consort did not send another thief. She sent a story, and she sent it, with real cunning, not down against us but up, ahead of us, to poison the very channel we needed. Word went about the household. I do not know from what mouth it first fell, but I know where it was made, that the old keeper of the wardrobe had grown careless and dishonest in her age, that the wardrobe accounts were in a shameful muddle, that a quantity of the crown's gold thread and several small stones could not be accounted for, and that the keeper, to cover her own thieving, had cooked up a wild tale, with a disgruntled guardsman she had drawn into it, about the Queen Consort hiding a child's trinket in a gown, a tale so strange that surely no one would believe it, but strange tales cling, and the point of it was not to be believed. The point of it was to make sure that, when the strange tale of the bracelet reached the king, it would arrive already wrapped in the smell of my supposed crimes, so that the king would hear the dishonest old keeper's mad story, and never hear the truth Aldous Finch found. It was, I have to say, beautifully aimed. She had taken every small stone she herself had pried loose from the late queen's wall over 3 years, every unlogged length of velvet, every borrowed brooch, every discrepancy her own carelessness had caused, and she had gathered them into a single accusation and set them at my door. The very disorder she had made, she now named as my crime, and the worst of it was that the disorder was real. My book did show unaccountable losses. I had noted them myself, in my small hand in the margins, for 3 years, and a margin note that was meant to record the Queen Consort took this, and did not sign could be read, by a person who wished to, as the keeper lost this and tried to hide it. The truth I had carefully kept became the rope she meant to hang me with. For 2 days I did not sleep. I am not too proud to tell you that I wept, alone, in the little stoveroom off the wardrobe where no one could see, because it is a terrible thing to be old and honest, and to feel your one clean possession, your name, being taken from you by a person strong enough to take it, and to know that the very care you took to keep clean is being turned into the evidence of your filth. And the household, which had smiled at me for 31 years, began to look at me sideways, the way people look at a thing that may be about to fall, deciding already whether to be near it when it did. Damaris held. I will always love her for it. And Finch held, but Finch, I saw, was troubled because the race was going wrong. Captain Osric, hearing the household story, had drawn back further. A captain will not carry to his king a charge against the Queen Consort laid by a keeper the whole house is calling a thief. The channel was fouled, and Finch's careful, correct, up-the-proper-pipe plan, which had been right in a healthy house, was dying in a sick one. "I have made an error," he said to me on the second evening, and it cost him something to say it. He was not a man who spent his errors lightly. "I trusted the shape of the thing. I thought, I have the proof is lawful, I need only carry it up the lawful road, and the lawful road will do the rest. But the lawful road runs through frightened men, and she has learned to frighten men, and so the road is hers. I have been trying to win this the correct way, keeper, and the correct way is blocked. I must find another road, one that does not run through the chamberlain or the council or a captain who has decided to survive. A road that goes straight to a person she cannot frighten and cannot buy and cannot outrun." He was quiet a moment. "There is one such person in this kingdom that I know of, and getting to her will cost me my post, most likely, and possibly worse, because to reach her I must break the very chain of proper channels I have spent my life honoring. But a rule that protects a liar is not a rule worth keeping. My late queen would have known that. I think I have only just learned it." "Who," I said, "who is the person she cannot frighten?" "The king's own sister," said Finch. "The Princess Elara. She sits on no council the Queen Consort can pack. She wants nothing the Queen Consort can give or take. And it is said of her, I have heard it from men I trust, that she loved the late Queen Isolde like her own blood, and that she has never once in her life let a wrong go by her because it was inconvenient to notice it. If I can put the bracelet and the book and the 2 witnesses in front of Princess Elara before the Queen Consort's story reaches her first, then the truth has a chance. If I cannot, if the story gets there first, then we are finished, you and I, and that little girl will grow up believing her one comfort was carelessly lost, and the person who cut it from her wrist will sit at the king's right hand and go on taking whatever she pleases." He looked at me. "So, it is a race after all, keeper, but I have chosen a shorter road and I mean to run it. Will you come with me? I will not pretend it is safe, but I will not carry your name into that room without you standing beside it." I was 70 years old and afraid, and my name was already half ruined, and I had nothing left in the world but a book that told the truth and an old woman's stubbornness. I stood up. "Bring the book," I said, "and the bracelet, and Damaris. If we are to be called liars, Sergeant, let us be called liars to the face of a person honest enough to know we are not. We could not simply walk to the Princess Elara. That is the thing people who have never lived in a great house never understand. You cannot cross to a person of that rank the way you cross a street. There are chamberlains and equerries and closed doors and 100 small officials whose whole purpose is to decide who reaches the great and who is turned away at the threshold. And the Queen Consort's story had gone ahead of us into every one of those small officials' ears. If we went by the ordinary road, we would be stopped at the first door by a footman who had already heard that the old keeper was a thief and the guardsman her confederate, and the book and the bracelet would be taken from us for safe keeping, and we would never see them again, and that would be the end. Finch knew all this. He had thought it through with the same patience he had brought to the seam. And what he did next was the bravest thing I saw him do in all of it. braver than standing in a doorway, because it put not another man's greed but his own honor on the scale. Princess Elara kept, that winter, no great state, for she was a plain living woman who disliked the palace and spent as much of the year as she could at a modest house on the edge of the royal park, with a few servants and her dogs and her books. She came to the palace only for what duty required, and she was due to come. This was the hinge of it, the one gap in the wall for the winter feast, which was but 2 days off. She would come by the east gate in the morning before the feast, with a small retinue, and she would go first, as she always did, to the late Queen Isolde's memorial chapel, a small cold stone chapel in the old part of the palace, to sit a while alone, because she had loved Isolde and she kept that private observance every time she came, and everyone knew it, and no one disturbed it. "That is where I will reach her," Finch said. "Not through her chamberlain, not through a request that can be refused before it is read. In the chapel, at the memorial of the woman she loved and the woman whose child has been wronged. Alone, before the feast, before the Queen Consort's story can be poured into her ear at the high table. I will stand at the chapel door in my own uniform, on my own authority as a guard of the household, for a guard may stand at a door, that is no crime, and when she comes out from her prayers I will ask her, plainly, for the hearing that the proper channels will not give me, and I will put the book and the bracelet in her hands, and I will let the scale and the child's name speak for themselves. If she turns me away, I am finished, and I will have earned it, for I will have broken protocol to accost a princess at her private devotions. But I do not think she will turn me away. I think a woman who keeps a private vigil for a dead friend every single time she comes is a woman who has not let her heart be managed. And an unmanaged heart is the one thing the Queen Consort has never learned to defeat. So we waited 2 days, and they were the longest of my life, and the household story grew louder around me, and twice I was all but certain we would be seized before the feast on some trump charge and the whole thing lost. But Finch had told no one our plan, not Osric, not Damaris even until the last hour, not a soul, precisely because he had learned that a plan shared in that house was a plan betrayed, and so there was no leak, and the low men who might have stopped us did not know there was anything to stop. On the morning of the feast, before first light, the 3 of us, Finch in his uniform, Damaris and I in our plain wardrobe gray, the book wrapped in linen under my arm and the bracelet sewn, this time by my own honest hand, in a slip-stitch any of my women would know, into a little pouch at my breast where no reaching hand would find it. We went by the servants' ways through the waking palace to the old part, to the cold stone passage outside Queen Isolde's memorial chapel. And Finch took up his post at the door as though he had been set there by the highest authority in the land, and we waited in the shadow of a pillar, and we prayed, each in our own way, that an unmanaged heart would come. She came at 7:30, with the winter light just graying the high windows. I had seen the Princess Elara before at a distance, and had thought her unremarkable, a spare, upright woman past 60, plainly dressed, with a weathered outdoor face and none of the Queen Consort's handsome bloom. But there is a thing that certain people carry that has nothing to do with beauty or bloom, a kind of settled weight, the look of a person who has long ago stopped needing anyone's good opinion, and Princess Elara carried it, and when she came down that cold passage with 2 attendants a respectful distance behind her, I felt it, and I understood why Finch had staked everything on her. She was not a woman you could pour a story into. She was a woman who made up her own mind and had done so for 60 years, and would go on doing it until she died. She saw Finch at the chapel door and she checked her step, for a guard was not usually posted there, and one of her attendants moved forward to deal with the irregularity, to move the guardsmen aside as attendants do. And Finch did a thing then that I will remember to my last hour. He did not move aside, and he did not stand mute. He went down on one knee, not the shallow bob of court courtesy, but all the way down, the way a man kneels who is placing his whole self at another's mercy, And he stayed there, head bowed, and he said, in that level-carrying voice, "Your Highness, I am a guard of the king's household, and I have broken faith with the proper channels to reach you, and I will answer for it however you please. But before you go into the late queen, I ask you to hear a thing that concerns her youngest daughter, the Princess Elara, and a wrong done to her that the proper channels will not carry up because they are afraid. I have proof. It is lawful, and it is witnessed, and it will take you the length of one prayer to see it. If having seen it you find I have wasted your grief, you may break me, and I will thank you for the justice of it. But I could not let you kneel to the mother, without first showing you what has been done to the child." The attendant put a hand to Finch's shoulder to raise him, to remove him, and the Princess Adela lifted one finger, and the attendant stopped. She looked down at the kneeling guardsman for a long moment, that weathered, unmanaged face giving nothing away, and then she looked past him, at the two gray women by the pillar with a linen-wrapped book, and something moved behind her eyes. "Get up," she said to Finch. "It was not unkind. I do not have men kneel to me in cold passages. If you have something to say about Isolde's daughter, you will say it standing like a man, and I will decide standing like her friend." She turned to her attendants. "Wait at the end of the passage, all of you. What is said here is said to me." And when they had drawn back out of hearing, she folded her hands and looked at Finch and at me and at Damaris and said, "Now." Quickly and plainly, and no flourishes. "What has been done to the child?" And Finch told her plainly and no flourishes. The green state gown, charged with crown property, returned from the cleaners with a seam that was not the wardrobe's work. The weighing, against the late queen's own master roll, in the presence of two witnesses. The few drams of excess that a silk cannot honestly gain. The opening of the seam in the open on the book. And what fell out of it, untouched by any hand, onto the open page, the Princess Elara's hospital bracelet, cut with a blade from a sleeping child's wrist, wrapped in linen, sewn away in a court gown and sent out of the house and quietly back, to lie where the child would never look and no one would ever weigh. And the second key, and the hand in the drawer at the low hour. And the story now going round the house to make the honest keeper a thief, so that the truth would arrive already poisoned. "Show me," said Princess Adela. I came forward, and my old hands did not shake now. I have wondered since why they had steadied, and I think it was because I was at last in front of a person who I knew would look at the truth and not through it. And I unwrapped the book and laid it open to the entry, and I read her the weights, the roll and the scale, and I showed her the 3 signatures, and Damaris said her piece, clear and steady, that she had seen it fall from the seam untouched. And then I opened the little pouch at my breast, and I took out the bracelet, and I put it into the Princess Adela's own hand, and she held it up to the gray light from the high window, and she read the paper under the clear skin of it, the child's name, the date, the physician's mark, and she turned the little cut clasp in her weathered fingers, the clasp that snaps and cannot be reopened save with a blade, and she was silent for a long, long time. When she spoke, her voice had changed. It was very quiet, and there was something under it that I would not have wanted turned on me. "I sat with this child in the infirmary," she said, 3 weeks ago. I sat by her bed one night when the fever was high and her father could not bear to, and she held my hand with this on her wrist, and she told me she was half in a dream with the fever. She told me it was her lucky band, and that so long as it stayed on she would not go where her mother went. She meant the late queen. She meant she would not die. Princess Adela closed her hand around the bracelet. And someone cut it off her arm in her sleep, and let her believe it was thrown out with the ashes, and sewed it into the hem of a gown. She looked up, and her weathered face had gone still and terrible. "Who?" Finch did not answer at once, and I understood why, and it was the last piece of his careful mind that I came to admire, standing in that cold passage. He did not say the name. He said, "Your Highness, I have not laid the deed at any door, and I will not, because I did not see the hand that did it, and a man who accuses what he has not seen is no better than the story now going round the house against this keeper. What I have seen, I have shown you. The bracelet was in the hem. The gown belongs to Her Majesty the Queen Consort and is charged to her by name in the keeper's book. The second key is in Her Majesty's dressing woman's keeping, at Her Majesty's own request. The hand in the drawer at the low hour was that dressing woman's. These are the things I have seen and can prove. The line that joins them, Your Highness, I leave to you, for you have the standing to draw it and I do not. I have only ever asked to put the truth in front of a person who would not be afraid to follow where it points. And Princess Elara looked at the guardsman for a long moment, and I saw a kind of grim respect come into her face, the respect of one careful person for another. You are a rare sort of witness, Sergeant, she said. Most men who bring me a truth cannot wait to hang a name on it. You have handed me the rope, and let me tie the knot myself. She slipped the bracelet into her own sleeve, and she closed the book with her own hand, and she tucked it under her own arm, and by that one gesture, taking the evidence into her own keeping out of ours, she took the whole weight of the thing onto herself, off of two frightened women and a guardsman who had staked his post, and I felt something in my chest that I had not felt in 3 years, which was the feeling of no longer being alone against something too big for me. You will come with me, she said. All 3 of you, not to the feast, to the king, now before that woman has her hour at the high table. And you will bring your scale keeper and your master roll, for I will have this weighed again in front of my brother's own eyes, so that no one may ever say it was a trick of the old keeper's making. If what you have shown me is true, and I believe it is true, God help this house, then it will not be a guardsman's word against a queen's this morning. It will be a scale's word. And a scale, Sergeant, cannot be frightened and cannot be bought, and does not care whose gown it weighs. She turned toward the passage's end where her attendants waited. The chapel will keep, she said, half to herself. Isolde would want the living daughter seen to first. She always did. What followed I saw with my own eyes, though I have needed years to understand all of it, and I will tell it as it happened. The Princess Elara did not send a message to the king asking for an audience. She walked to him. She walked through the waking palace on the morning of the feast with a linen-wrapped book under her arm and a guardsman and 2 gray women in her wake, and the small officials who had been ready to turn us away at every door took one look at the king's own sister at our head, and the look on her face, and stood aside, and opened, and the fouled channel that had defeated us for days simply ceased to exist, because a person the Queen Consort could not frighten had put herself at the front of it. That, I have come to think, is what rank is truly for in the hands of a decent person, not to be served, but to open the doors that fear has shut against the truth. King Alaric received his sister in his private cabinet, in his mourning coat, before the day's ceremony, and he was not pleased to be interrupted, and then he saw her face and stopped being displeased and began to be afraid, in the way a man is afraid who has let himself not see a thing for a long time, and senses that he is about to be made to see it. The Queen Consort was not there. That was Adela's doing. She had timed it so before the high table, before the story could be poured, and she asked the king plainly to send for the assay scale from the jewel house, and for the green state gown from the wardrobe strong press, and the Queen Consort's dressing woman with the second key, and Captain Osric, and the Lord Chamberlain, and to have them all brought to the cabinet before he broke his fast, and to trust her that it was worth an hour of his mourning. And the king, who did not always heed his sister but had never once known her to be frivolous, sent for them. I will not stretch out the weighing, because it was the least dramatic and the most important thing in the whole affair, and Finch had taught me by then to love the plainness of it. The gown was brought. The emeralds were verified out of it and set aside. The assay scale was set up on the king's own table. The master roll was opened to the entry in my own hand, made and initialed years before, giving the gown's true weight. And in front of the king and his sister and the chamberlain going gray, and Captain Osric standing very straight, and the dressing woman who had begun, very slightly, to tremble, the gown was hung on the scale, empty, and the number was read aloud, and it was more than the roll by the same few drams as before. "A gown does not gain weight in a press, your majesty," said Adela quietly. "Silk does not thicken with the years. There is a thing in it that is not on the roll. Sergeant, as you did before in the open on the book, open the seam." And Finch, in front of the King of Eldermore, laid the hem across his knee and opened the running stitch a stitch at a time, and folded it back. And there was the second little wrap of linen. For I had returned the bracelet to its own hem the night before, by Adela's own instruction, and sewn it in myself before witnesses and entered the doing of it in the book, so that what the king saw fall out would fall from the very gown, in the very place. And no one could ever say the old keeper had planted it in her hand. He tipped it out onto the open book, untouched, and the Princess Elara's hospital bracelet fell into the light on the king's own table, with his own dead first wife's daughter's name upon it, and the king rose from his chair. He did not shout. I had braced for shouting. He rose, and he took up the little band of cut cloth, and he read the paper under the clear skin of it, the name and the date and the physician's mark, and he turned the cut clasp in his fingers, the clasp that a blade had opened at a sleeping child's wrist, and the color went out of his face, and he set it down very gently, the way you set down something you are afraid to break, and he said, in a voice gone quiet and dreadful, "This was cut from my daughter's arm." No one answered him. He did not need an answer. He looked at the green gown, charged in the book to his wife by name. He looked at the dressing woman with the second key, who was weeping now, and who, I will say this for her, it was the one decent thing done by any of that party, did not try to lie when the king's eyes came to her, but only whispered that she had done as she was bid and had not known what was in the hem, only that she was told to send the gown for its cleaning and see it hung and speak of it to no one, and that when it was found she was sent to fetch it quietly back. He looked at the chamberlain who had carried the leak, and last he looked at his sister, and he said, very low, "You knew before you came in here." "I suspected," said Adela. "The scale knew, I only trusted it." She laid her hand flat on the book. "Brother, hear me before you do anything. This keeper," she nodded to me, "was 3 days from being ruined for a thief, on a story built to bury this very finding. This guardsman broke the proper channels to reach me, because the proper channels were shut by fear, and he did it correctly. Even so, he witnessed everything. He weighed everything. He accused no one he had not proof of, and he handed me the naming of the guilty rather than seize it for himself. If there is honor left in this house, it is standing in front of you in a plain coat. Do not let the noise that is coming swallow him." The noise did come, the Queen Consort, sent for at last, sweeping into the cabinet with her handsome outrage ready and her story on her lips, the mad old keeper, the disgruntled guard, the muddle in the accounts. But she came into a room where the scale already stood, and the bracelet already lay on the king's table, and the king's own face was already turned to stone, and I watched her fine performance meet that stone and break against it, and I watched her understand in the space of 3 breaths that the story had come too late, that the truth had reached the one person she could not frighten before her poison could, and that a scale had spoken where her voice could not follow. She changed her ground, she always could, in an instant, from outrage to bewilderment to injured innocence. She had no knowledge of any bracelet, some servant, some plot against her, but it did not catch, because the king was no longer listening to voices. He was looking at a thing that could not be talked out of a scale. I will not set down all that the king said to his wife, for much of it was said with the door closed and is not mine to tell, and some of it I could not have borne to write. I will tell you only the end of that morning, and then the true end, which came later and quieter and matters more. The king did not, that day, cast the Queen Consort down in a public ruin, though many in the house wished it. He was a slower and a sadder man than that, and there were the children to think of, and the shame of the crown, and a great house does not tear itself open before the world without wounding the innocent along with the guilty. But he stripped from her that morning every key and every charge over the late Queen's store. He restored the debellentry and the twice-yearly reconciliation by his own written order, sealed that same day. He set the wardrobe formally under the witness of the household guard in perpetuity, so that no charged garment would ever again pass unweighed, and he sent for his daughter. That is the part I hold closest, and I will end the loud story there and go to the quiet one. He sent for the Princess Elara, and she was brought to the cabinet frightened, because a child summoned to the king's own room fears she has done wrong, and she came in small and grave and watchful in the way I have told you, expecting, I think, to be gently taught once more that things are lost. And the king came down out of his great chair and knelt on the floor in front of his youngest daughter, a thing no one in that room had ever seen him do, and he took her small wrist in his 2 hands, the wrist that had gone bare, and he set the hospital bracelet back around it, and worked the little clasp shut himself, clumsily, a king's thick fingers on a physician's small fitting, and he said to her, "It was not lost, Elara. It was never lost. It was taken, and it was wrong, and it is found, and here it is, and no one will ever take it from you again while I am alive." And the grave, watchful child looked down at the band on her wrist, and then up at her father's face, and she did not weep. She had learned too well not to weep, but something in her small face came unfrozen, some watchfulness she had carried since the fever finally set down, and she leaned forward and put her forehead against her father's shoulder, and the King of Eldermore knelt on his own cabinet floor and held his daughter and let the feast wait. Aldous Finch was not broken for what he had done. Princess Adela saw to that, and the king himself, once the first grief had passed, saw the shape of it clearly, that a guard who breaks a fouled channel to carry the truth up to an honest ear has not betrayed his duty but performed it, when the channel itself had gone corrupt. He was not made a great officer. That was not in him, and he would not have taken it. He was made by the king's own hand, the standing witness of the wardrobe, the office written into being that very winter, the office that says a charged garment of the crown may not be handled without a guard present to weigh and to sign, and he held it quietly at my side, until I laid down my keys 3 years later, an old woman with her clean name whole. He never spoke of that winter as a triumph. When I once called it that over the reconciliation, he shook his head and said, "It was not a triumph, keeper. A triumph is when you win a thing you might have lost. We did not win anything. We only refused to let a true number be called false. That is not victory. That is just the work." And he ruled the day's column straight with his straightedge, and signed his name and stood his post. I keep to this day the page of the book. The king let me keep it when I retired, as the one souvenir I asked for, the page where the weights are entered in my hand, the roll and the scale, and beneath them, in a square, unhurried hand that I would know anywhere in the world, the plain line that began all of it. One seam not the wardrobe's work. Flag for inventory. People who see it think it a strange thing for an old woman to frame. They expect a keepsake of a great house to be a jewel, or a lock of a queen's hair, or some grand thing. But I was a keeper of the book for 31 years, and I learned what the late queen knew, and what a plain guardsman taught me all over again in a single winter, that the great crimes of a great house are never done with a shout. They are done in the quiet, in the margins, in the drams no one weighs and the seams no one opens, by hands that take what they want and write another name against it. And the only thing that ever stops them, the only thing, is a person of no great rank, who will not let a true number be called false, and who does the plain work of weighing the thing, in the open, on the book, in front of witnesses, no matter what it costs and no matter who owns the gown. That is the whole of it. A frail child got back the one comfort she carried out of the dark, and got it back from her father's own kneeling hands, and grew up knowing that in the worst hour a scale had spoken for her when voices would not. An honest woman kept her name, and a plain man in a plain coat, whom everyone in the house mistook for furniture, stood in a doorway one winter and would not let the count come out wrong, and the count in the end came out true. It always does, if there is one honest hand left to hold the pen. That is the thing I most want you to carry away from this. Not the queen who fell, but the guardsman who weighed. There is always, if you look for it, one honest hand, and a kingdom is only ever kept by the people willing to be it.